Welcome to Paint With Me. Today we're painting this beautiful scene called Idaho Sawtooths. This quick watercolor sketch is the perfect way to explore the magic of watercolor, so let's get started. First thing we're doing is wetting the whole area above the mountains. Nice clean water. And then come in around the shape of the clouds, and while it's still wet, drop in that blue color. And I want to emphasize here that you don't overwork this. Just drop in the color while it's still wet. You can always come back later and make it a little bit darker if you want to. But with clouds, less is more, I'd like to say. And with that same blue mixed with a little bit of cadmium red, with the tip of your paintbrush, come in and go over the lines of the shape of these sawtooth mountains. Now, part of this is mixing the cadmium red with the blue, and part of it is laying in blue and having the cadmium red flow into it. It's not necessarily mixed together. And so pay close attention to the light source, where the light source is coming from. In this case, it's coming from the right side. So it's a nice, beautiful, sunny day. When you see those clouds that are pillowy like that, it's an indicator of the sun shining, and that's going to create a light source on those mountain peaks. And so that warm color of the cadmium red mixed with the blue helps that give a warmth look. And now underneath the mountains is an area of trees, but this is in the background, so you're not seeing those trees. You're seeing more of an area of trees. And so obviously you're not going to paint every one of those trees, but it's a green color mixed with a little bit of that same sky blue color. And you can add a little bit of that cadmium red to it to knock it down a little bit. That pushes it back in the background. And so in the foreground, actually it's more the midground, are these pine trees. And I like to start with a lighter color of that sap green, and using the tip of your brush, just kind of dance around that area and make sure that there are some little tiny holes that you can see with the first pass, and then come back with the darker greens and let that flow into it. We're not just painting one shape of trees. We're going into it with interesting shapes. Not too much pigment, about half pigment and half water. This is something that you practice a lot with trees. Lighter colors and darker colors, and even a little bit of that cadmium red can give that a little bit of a rust look, and some of the burnt sienna you can mix in with that as well. So it's just not one solid color. Now in the area where those bushes separate the trees in the background, and that little sandbar right there, I like to establish that area first so that I know where those trees will come against it in the background, the trees that are up next to the mountains. I'm dropping in that burnt sienna, those bushes that lie over the log that lays across the lake there. Now that I've got those bush areas by the sandbar. Now it gives me an area of where I'm putting those trees in. And we're just laying in shapes of lighter green and darker green. You can soften the edges here and there. Use the very tip of your brush to do this. One of the mistakes that people make when they're painting trees is getting the tops of them too thick. Use the very tip of your brush for that. There will be several layers of passes to go to show these trees. Lighter color and then darker color over it, and once that's dry, you'll come back over it with more detail. The way you get detail with and value contrast with watercolor are using different layers, and this layering is called glazing. And once one layer is down, you can blend darker colors with that. But then once the area is dry, then you can come back over it with that same green and get some real detail with that. But look how I'm coming in with little pieces of shape. Interesting shapes. It's not just one tree next to another. You're looking for interesting shapes. That's what makes it a painting, not just a photograph. When there's those sparkly little holes that you leave, it's easy to go around them now. It's hard to get them later. And you can always go over it if you feel like there's too much white showing through. Now this area right there where there's some dead trees in the foreground, that gives some interest to the scene. And so remember that the white of the paper is what is white you use in watercolor. So go around those areas and leave them white. And now it just feels like dancing across the page, using these dark colors with that sap green underneath, going around the bushes. Pretty soon these bushes start to move forward because of the value from the dark trees to the light bushes. That makes them come forward. A little bit more detail against those dead wood, those white dead trees that are just hanging there. That'll make that show up a lot stronger with the dark against it. At the base where the sandbar is and those bushes, that's where the darker greens can come in. And that helps for them to stand out as well. Okay, now I'm coming back in with the trees. I've got kind of the basic shape that I want with all of the trees, and now I want to pay close attention to that light source, where that light source is coming from. And so the left side of the trees will be darker and leave some of the light on the right side of the trees. So you've got dark against the light, but you're not painting every little tree. Look for ways to see big areas of shape that it helps to squint your eyes and look for areas of interesting shapes, but still getting the look of a tree. But they're kind of bunched together, almost like they're kissing each other. Trees aren't too much separated. Okay, around the end of that fallen tree, that dead tree that's laying there, I'm just painting in a little bit of the dark area against the dead part of that tree. Now, the sandbar, you put very, very little burnt sienna, watered down. Not too much there. Because if you put too much, it will not read as a sandbar. It's really quite light. Now, when you're dropping in this blue color, it's quite similar to the sky color. So just use that blue. It's that cobalt blue that comes in your kit. And while that's still wet, then with that blue, you can drop in some of the reflection of the trees. And that's really more of a dark blue. You can drop in a little bit of green, but it's more blue than it is green, even though it's a reflection. And make sure those lines are horizontal that you're putting in for the reflection of the trees to give that the look of water flowing. Water flowing is always horizontal. Now dropping in a little bit of that rust color in the very foreground, and that shows where it's still wet there from the lake, but it's kind of that burnt sienna rust color, pretty much watered down. And we're getting a good shadow underneath that dead wood that's just laying there. A little bit more detail in the bush above that dead wood. I like to wet the area where I'm working on those bushes right there. Just wet that area and then drop in some of that cadmium red, and that will bring your eye forward into the foreground. As I'm laying in some of this area, I want you to pay close attention to the design of this painting and how your eye travels through this. So the design of that log that's laying there across that lake, and it creates kind of a Z shape, and your eye follows up into that bush in the dead wood laying there, and then it travels over on the sandbar and up around the mountain peaks to the right and brings your eye down into that those trees and back down. And this is good design to really pay attention to keep the viewer's eye in the painting and not going off of it. When someone's looking at a painting, they keep their eye on there for a lot of reasons, and sometimes you can travel right off and not even know why. But part of it is using good elements of design. And now for this sandbar to really show up well, bringing some of that darker blue right up against the base of that. Now going back into the trees, I'm looking for areas to indicate the logs, the trunk of the tree, not log, the trunk of the tree. But I'm not going to go in every tree and find the trunk. It's more of an indicator. It's part of telling the story without giving you every detail. But it helps for the viewer to understand what's going on. One of those less is more principles. Okay, now going back in this area of the trees in the background where we wanted that to stay quite subtle because it's so far away, but we want to tell the viewer that those are trees. And so really you come into that and add some texture, but you're certainly not painting a bunch of trees. You're just painting the mass of where trees are because it's further in the background. And you want it to keep that way. So I'm coming back and just touching up some areas that I want to have a little bit more value, a little more detail in some areas. And if you want to, you can have more detail in the mountain peaks in the background. But, I like to keep that pretty simple in the background. But anyway, you can kind of touch this up and give it more value where it needs to. This is the time to do it. So I hope you've enjoyed this video of the Sawtooths in Idaho. It's such a beautiful part of the state. And feel free to go back and go over the video as many times as you want to and stop it where you need to. But thanks for joining me today.